to everyone in the Love, Wonder, Read book club. My name is Janine Rosche, and I'm the admin for this group. And I am so fortunate that I have Rachel McMillan here with me, and she has written The London Restoration, along with many, many other books. So you probably are familiar with some of her work, and I would love for her to introduce herself to you all.
Hello, Janine. Hello, everybody in this group. My name is Rachel McMillan. I live in Toronto, Canada, and I've written many books, historical mysteries. I write contemporary romances in the 3/4 Time series. My most recent, as Janine said, is The London Restoration. I've also this year started publishing nonfiction. The first is called Dream Plan Go, and it's all about pursuing your love of independent adventure near and far. Basically, it's a travel book released during COVID. What was I thinking? I didn't know, everybody. I didn't know. And the most recent, as of a few weeks ago, is a Very Merry Holiday Movie Guide, which is all about my love for made-for-TV Christmas movies. So basically, I have a wide range of tastes. But as for London Restoration, it basically is a love story that begins where usually the credits of a movie would roll with the lovers reunited after being apart for so many years. So I think that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here.
And so I wanted, I love reading historical romance, especially, but there's something about World War II stories that get me. And I think it's because it's long ago, but it's not so long ago that we don't still have some kind of reference point to it, as well as family members who served there.
Yeah.
Once we start going back a little bit to the other wars, it's like, well, somebody in your family fought there, but you never heard the stories. And one of the things that I found most interesting about this is you have a family member who served for Canada. Yeah. And it was part of his story that you wanted to show through Brent Somerville, your hero in the London Restoration. Yeah. Can you tell us about him?
So my Opa, my grandfather, he unfortunately passed away when I was 17. So I don't know him anymore, but he served, and Canada, actually, we're still a colony. So we fight when Great Britain does. So he served from 1939 to 1945, which was the entirety of the war. He never wanted to fire a gun. He wanted to instead carry men instead of arms. So he was a stretcher bearer during the Second World War, fighting for the Canadian Armed Forces. And while he was over there, actually, he met my grandmother, my Oma, when the Canadian Forces liberated Leeuwarden in Holland. And he came back with her, and she didn't speak any English. And so it's a fantastically romantic story, but something that I honored through my hero is that the camaraderie that my grandfather had with the other stretcher bearers in his unit, as well as some of his PTSD. When I was a kid, we'd go to see the fireworks on Canada Day, and he had trouble hearing them because they reminded him of gunfire. So I tried to immortalize and memorialize him through this character. But Janine, what you say is really true. I think that the Second World War, all of us that I know have some kind of connection, whether someone was affected by it on the home front or overseas. It's something that's still very much in our family histories. So that's always kind of fascinating.
Yes. Now, the London Restoration really starts with a love of the London churches. And I'm fascinated by churches. I'm sure most people are, especially if you're a believer of any faith. I mean, just any house of worship. It's beautiful. There's something about it that just inspires awe, and not just because of the architecture, but also because of what it means and how it has touched the lives of so many people. But you have a specific group of churches that you really highlight in this novel. and they were the churches that were designed or redesigned, I'm not exactly sure how you would phrase it, by Christopher Wren. Can you tell the people who are watching how a little bit more about Christopher Wren, because I had never heard of him before reading your book?
So Christopher Wren was a lot of the famous structures that you see if you go to London, or even if you watch Mary Poppins. I mean, St. Paul's Cathedral, the bird lady who's feeding the birds, that's the first time I had ever seen that cathedral, and I was like 6 years old. But Christopher Wren was an architect. He was also an astrologer. He was basically the quintessential Renaissance man. And in 1666, the Great Fire of London kind of decimated all of London. It decimated what St. Paul's Cathedral looked like at the time. It wiped out all the churches. And Christopher Wren, being the go-getter that he was, decided, I'm going to rebuild London. And it took him 2 weeks alone to present these plans to rebuild the city to the king. And what I found fascinating was they rebuilt it. He designed a lot of the churches and buildings that we know today if you go to London. But in the Second World War, pretty much the exact same amount of churches were blitzed by the bombs of World War II as were decimated by the Great Fire. And I thought that was really interesting. So he was an architect who designed, and in many cases, as you say, redesigned churches that were felled by the Great Fire. And when it came to rebuilding the city of London after the Second World War, they went back to his original blueprints and thought, how can we make sure that we redesign the churches? And what I find so amazing is that it was where they started rebuilding. It was the churches that were first, because those were the community, those were the heart of the city, the steeples of the heart of the city. And until the 1960s, St. Paul's, the Dome of St. Paul's, was the highest building in the London skyline, which I find is just gorgeous because it kind of stands out. So that's who he was, an architect, an astrologer, philosopher. He kind of did it all. He's he lived far longer than most people of his era did, and he's almost too good to be true. I love it.
he was like the Ryan Seacrest of
Vince's
era, you know. He does a little bit of this, does a little bit of that,
does it all,
does it great, and everybody loves him. Yeah. Well, speaking of his designs, we've been having a little bit of fun in our book club doing some trivia about London. And so I have to announce a couple winners. So my first question was, now I'm not going to remember what it was. I don't remember what it was, but now that's going to drive me crazy. But the winner of that was Patty Hamblin Rood, and she is going to get some tea packets. And just because I write stories that are set in Montana, I have an abundance of huckleberry tea. Not exactly the English tea type,
but tasty.
It's fantastic. So Patty is going to get some huckleberry tea from me. And then our second one was about due to superstition, the Tower of London has 6 of these that they keep on the grounds.
Yes.
And it was ravens. Many people got that one right. And the person that won that one is Christy Corns, and she's going to win a $5 Starbucks gift card, so she can help herself to some coffee. And then the third one, now I should have had all of these written down because now I can't remember. What was the real name of Big Ben? Because everybody refers to the whole structure as Big Ben.
Yeah.
But the Big Ben is actually the bell. And so the structure was called the Clock Tower. And then April Kidwell told me that in 2012, they renamed it to the Elizabeth Tower after Queen Elizabeth.
Oh.
And she happened to win the $10 Amazon gift card. And so the last piece of trivia, the person who won is Aletta Cherry. But the question was, this was in the original plans by Christopher Wren to put this strange object on the top of St. Paul's Cathedral. And I wanted to see if you knew what that was. No one got it right in their guesses.
And I have to tell you all, I know that I came across this in research, but London Restoration came out this year, but the research for it initially is a few years ago. It's been a while, but Janine jump-started my memory. It was actually a pineapple. And if anyone has seen the most recent BBC production of Sanditon by Jane Austen, you notice that pineapples are a major symbol. And that is because pineapples were very exotic. They were exotic fruit that kind of memorialized the British colonial tendency, which was to go and make sure the sun never sets on the British Empire. Well, that meant that the span of the empire was everything that the sun touches. Now, nowadays, we find that a little like, oh, that's kind of uncomfortable. Let's let everybody live their lives. But there was something about the pine, and it was going to be a pineapple. Now, thank heavens, literally, that it is now a cross on top of a globe, which represents God's dominion over all of the world. That's on the very top of St. Paul's. So a little bit more of a Christian emblem there, but it was going to be a pineapple.
Right. It would have been interesting though. So yeah. Rachel McDaniel asks, how long did it take you to research the London Restoration?
Well, I actually had no intention, and anyone who has listened to me talk about this book, which I've been doing a lot over the past few months, has heard this. I had no intention to research World War II fiction at all. I was never going to write this period. I was on a vacation to London, not a research trip. I was coming back from Scotland, where a friend of mine had a play debut at the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, and I had studied in England when I was in university for a bit, and I went into a church, St. Bartholomew the Great, and I was just overcome by the power of the symbol of these structures withstanding everything. Millenniums, wars, bombs. And I knew in that moment, Rachel, you have to write these churches. But I was also aware of the fact that very few publishers would take a huge tome on the history of Christopher Wren. They weren't going to publish that. So I got the idea. It would be probably, so I went on that trip to London in 2017. And it was around January of 2018 that I really kind of deep dove. I was writing a different series at the time, a historical mystery series. And I started really looking at the blueprints of Wren's structure, getting an idea of what I would need to zone in on for the Second World War. So I would say maybe 2.5 years. Plus, I did luckily get to go back to London, and I spent 10 days specifically researching and writing the churches. That would be 2 years ago, coming up next month, before the plague, when we could visit places. So I would say probably about 2.5 years, but some of it was very intensive. I looked at all of Wren's original blueprints. Toronto, where I live, has a massive public library system. I was obviously doing other things at the time, but there was a lot of research that went into this book. So if people can put up with my very long, rambly research note, it was just like, hey guys, I did put a lot of research into this. So a lot, Rachel McDaniel, a lot, but it was fun.
Well, and it shows. I mean, I wrote this in my review, and I wasn't the first person to say this, that it reads like a love letter, not just to the churches of London, but to London in general. You really get a sense for how much you love that city. And I know that traveling is a huge part of your life. And I forgot to say what Aletta was going to win. She's winning a copy of your May release, which was Dream, Plan, and Go, which is a fantastic guide to traveling either by yourself or, you know, I'm sure you could still use a lot of those tips if you were traveling with family. And it was fantastic. I've read it. I interviewed you about it for the Love Wonder Read Journal, and it is full of information, and it's fantastic. So I know as I was reading this book, I thought, oh, I got to go to London, but first I need to reread Rachel's book and learn about how to go by myself or how to make it, the best trip possible. And it's a really great book if you're looking to travel, and it doesn't have to be to London, but if you're going
No,
to
it
a
can be
different
anywhere.
state, or a different city. So that is what Aletta is going to win. But I definitely recommend it to anybody who loves to travel, or maybe they love to travel, but they're a little unsure of how to do it safely or economically. You give a lot of great tips. So I think it's a fantastic resource. Now, the title, The London Restoration, it obviously had to do with the fact that a lot of these churches needed to be restored, along with many of the other places in London that were hit by bombs during the war. Yeah. But it has a double meaning, because it is a romance, and it is a powerful, very relatable romance that I just thought was absolutely beautiful. And you are known for writing glorious romances, and so I wasn't surprised at all to find that in this story. Can you tell us a little bit about Diana and Brent's relationship?
Well, I have to give some credit here. Several years ago at ACFW conference, I was sitting talking to Katie Breslin, who is a brilliant author, one of my favorite historical romance writers. And she was telling me about the plot of a book that would eventually become High as the Heavens, which was about a nurse in Belgium who's reunited with the husband she thought was dead. And he thinks she's a traitor, and she thinks that their relationship is over, and they're married already. So they have to learn to fall in love with each other again. And I love that trope in romance, because I think that it allows for a lot of mature themes that you don't get, even though I love romances where people meet and it's a meet cute, and you get to join the couple in that way, and you get to see that through flashbacks, how Brent and Diana meet, how they marry, etc. But I was really kind of enamored with the way that she told this story, and it's become one of my favorite books, and I thought I'd love to try that sometime. And what for me is the most romantic thing is that these two people have to choose to fall in love with each other again, because they married before the war. They've been apart for 4 years. They're different people now. When they're together again, it's not as if they're meeting as they had the first time, where they're innocent and the world is a different place. I think a lot of people this year are going to find the same thing in romance, because we've been through so much as a universe, right? We've had to readjust to a new world. So the romance for me is more, and it mirrors, I use St. Paul a lot in the book, in Brent's job as a theology professor, where you die to yourself daily for Christ, right? I mirror that in a relationship, that every day they have to choose to be what the other person needs. So the title meant the London Restoration, in that, yes, they're rebuilding the city, but it's also the restoration of a marriage. And for a little added fun, Christopher Wren, who's the major architect and a huge kind of off-screen character in the book, he was rebuilding churches during what we call the Restoration period of London in its history. So there's like a three-pronged approach to that. But I'm a huge romantic. I'm not married. I'm still a spinster. It's hard to meet people during COVID. But I'm a hopeless romantic, and I hope that people come away with, even though it is a married romance, sometimes those are the most romantic, because you're mature, you're in it for the long haul. It's not just a physical or chemistry attraction based on something physical. It gives me a lot as a writer in terms of what I can play with in characters. So yay.
Well, and that's something that I just loved about this, because I don't know if you know, but I teach child and human and family development classes for the
Yes.
University of Colorado.
Yeah.
And in those classes, we're always talking about the reasons why we choose to enter into a relationship with someone, and whether or not we're going to choose to commit to them, and how we can make that commitment last. And I thought this was a very smart book. Basically, I read textbooks all the time on this kind of stuff, and I thought it was so wise, because I think more couples would have a stronger, more thriving marriage long term if they understood that they were not going to be the same person that they were at the beginning of the relationship, and their spouse or their partner would not be the same person that they were at the beginning of the relationship. And I have this conversation with my husband all the time. I think if we each knew everything there was to know about each other before we got married, we probably would not have gotten married. But I didn't know some things about me, and he didn't know some things about him, because we were so young. And so it really has been, for our situation and for many people I know, that you do have to learn to fall in love with the new person that your spouse becomes. And one of my favorite lines was, it's in Diana's internal monologue. And she says she wanted to love him as the Diana she had become, because even she could recognize that she was not the same person anymore.
Yeah.
And then he has come back for more, and he has PTSD, which I think that you handled extremely well. That's such a sensitive topic. There's so much PTSD that has inflicted itself on many veterans, but also just people who have gone through traumatic experiences. You really do a great, delicate job of handling such a difficult topic.
Thanks.
Yeah. And then one of the things that I also loved about this is they share a common passion for these churches. And I wanted to pose to the people who watch this, so you can answer in the comments, whether or not you've ever learned to love an interest of someone else simply because you love the person, and you have chosen to love that. Because I think that Brent, he appreciated the churches in London, but there was a great moment, and I think I wrote this down, and of course now I can't find it, but he says, oh, well, I'm familiar with these churches, and she says, but you've never seen them with me.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm about to show you an entire different world. And my husband and I just went to visit Gettysburg a couple months ago.
I love Gettysburg. What a gorgeous place that is.
And I was like, are you ready? Because I know a lot about Gettysburg. Like, you may have thought it was boring when you were younger, but I'm about to tell you all the interesting stuff, and I'm going to go behind the scenes, And so it was that feeling of me being able to share something I'm passionate about with him. And so I wanted to see if anybody has ever been able to share their passion with someone that they care about. It doesn't have to be a spouse. It could be a friend, or, a sibling, or whatever. Or if you've ever gained an appreciation for something because you loved someone. Because I thought that was a really sweet thing that they could really bond over, is this passion for churches. And they even said at one point, Diana wanted to name her future children after the names on the tombstones in one of the church.
Westminster Abbey. And I find that, that is something that people become more attractive when they're animated, and when they're really passionate about something, you get to see their personality. And so I think it makes sense that if someone is really dedicated to something, that it can make them even physically be more attractive, because they're animated, their eyes light up, they're smiling. So I wanted to go to Gettysburg with you. I think Pennsylvania is one of the most beautiful states in America, and Gettysburg is just it's hallowed ground, right? When you're there, there's this sense of reverence and the weight of history there that I think it's awesome.
Yeah,
that you're so geeked out about it.
I really am. So I don't write historical fiction, but if I ever did, it would have to take place somewhere around Gettysburg.
You need a hero who is a reenactor. In one of the,
that would be great.
I would love to read a story. My dad, even though I'm Canadian, my dad is huge huge Civil War buff. He just finished that big tome by Ron Chernow on Ulysses S. Grant.
Mm-hmm.
So as kids, we would bundle up in the van and we would drive through Canada on vacations, but also to U.S. historical sites, including Civil War sites. So I saw Gettysburg as a kid for the first time.
Yeah.
We're nerds.
Well, that brings up a question I was going to ask you towards the end, but I know that you have a passion for many European cities, but I wanted to ask, is there a city in the United States that you would love to write a story somewhat like the London Restoration about, and then one somewhere else in the world?
Well, anyone who's followed my career for a while knows that I have a huge, Boston has become my home away from home because I set the Van Buren and DeLuca series there, and often it's an hour flight from Toronto. So I was in Boston for research a ton. I'm a huge American Revolutionary buff. So I've done Boston. I have not yet written New York, and I'd love to write New York and Broadway, because I often go to this is before the plague. Okay, before the time that we're living in now, I will often go and see, just for a weekend, to see shows, and I'd love to write New York in the golden age of Broadway. As for European cities, I'm actually supposed to be in France right now on a research trip, but COVID. I want to write Brussels, and I think it's a city that not everyone has been to, and it's not on everyone's kind of mental roadmap, but Charlotte Bronte spent a lot of time there. I've spent a lot of time there, so I can see in the next few years visiting there fictionally. But good question. Also, there's so many U.S. cities that I love. I love Chicago so much. It's a neat place.
Well, I'm in Toledo, so if you ever want to come write
Toledo,
a love story to Toledo, I'm right here.
We need to get the border open. It's still closed. Who knows?
Yeah, I know. Toronto isn't that far away. My husband keeps trying to get me to move to Toronto. He's like, it's fantastic. I love it. And his company has a plant up there, and he's like, you would absolutely love it. And but it feels like it should be farther away. But
I know, no, it's an hour flight to most U.S. places. It's just right now with COVID, there's like no travel anywhere.
Right.
But soon, everybody, it has to end sometime.
Yes. Now, I want to ask you, and this is a slightly harder question. And this is I'm going to paint myself as a jerk. So I'll just give you that.
You're not a jerk.
You spent a lot of time writing about and researching about a very hard time in the world's history, and your characters obviously are dealing with the aftermath of that. I get frustrated sometimes when I see, we joke about first world problems and things like that. Well, I think there's something about 21st century problems that we tend to complain about things that, our grandparents would not have complained about, and take for granted things that maybe they wouldn't have taken for granted. Do you ever get frustrated, or how do you deal with that when you know exactly what some of these people went through because you spend so much time living in their heads, because they're your characters, they're your best friends for the time period that you're writing and marketing a book. How do you deal with that when we are going through difficult times, like we're going through a difficult time in our world right now? Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, I think it's really key to remember that when these people were going through it, they did not know the magnitude of what they were going through. So the petty annoyances and everything that affected them on a personal level, or with their immediate families, or with their spouses, they were just trying to get through day to day. They didn't realize that many, many decades later, people would be memorializing them in fiction on a grand scale. Just like right now, when so many places like Toronto, I mean, I can't go and sit in a restaurant. I can't go to a movie theater. When so many places are locked down, we're on our second wave of COVID. So we kind of knew it was coming, that we'd have to lock down again. and I'm just kind of talking to you, going through every day. Maybe 60, 70 years from now, somebody is going to write this magnanimous, wonderful, large tome about what we're going through. So what I try to do instead of that is focus on the fact that humans often are most peeved, and I did this while writing a marriage, even though I'm not married, by the little things. It's not the big world things that tick us off and make us angry. It's for Brent, she squeezes the toothpaste or the tooth powder in the wrong way. She leaves her coat over the chair. I try to focus on the fact that human nature doesn't always work in these large brush strokes. It's what are you dealing with day to day, because we can't see the entire, and this is biblical too, right? We see through a glass dimly. We can't see the entire picture. So right now, everything that's annoying us about COVID, where it's Zoom calls that are like spotty, or the fact that we can't do things, we're just trying to get through it. Later on, someone might make this a heroic moment in human history, but we're just trying to deal with it. So I do think that we're pretty lucky. I mean, one of the things that I think that makes me angry is when people are talking about how bored they are, when we have everything, you know, in the Second World War, if you wanted to my grandmother, who emigrated to Canada from Holland, a phone call from Holland to her from her family made the local paper because it was such a big deal. Yeah. Now we can Zoom call everybody. We can have television shows and movies at our fingertips. We have all the books we could ever need. That's when I tend to get peeved. But I also think that we don't know, when we're going through something, the magnitude of what it's going to be in the history of humanity. So I think people were just annoyed by tiny things like, oh, why is this person sitting so close to me in the tube shelter on, you know, a bomb raid? Just like during COVID, it's like, oh my gosh, my mask is like, I shouldn't have used this detergent because it's making my face itchy. We don't know everything that's going to happen. And I try to keep that in perspective.
Right. And I loved seeing how Brent and Diana were dealing with it at the time. Like, even, you know, you've already stated that they were a married couple. So their wedding takes place in a very unique atmosphere. And I'll let the readers read that, but it's definitely a not the ideal wedding situation, but they just wanted to get married, so it didn't matter. And so it was kind of cute. Another part that I loved about their relationship, there were two things that really stood out to me. First, you did a great job of showing that they weren't just attracted to each other physically, because, you know, in romance, there's obviously going to be that part, but sometimes writers, and I'm one myself, you know, we can focus a little too much on that and the physical attraction. And we know that they were both, you know, good looking people, but that wasn't what attracted them to each other. And you found little ways of sticking those details in, so we knew that their relationship was about more than just the physical attraction.
Well, I think, as you have to remember when you're writing romance, that to the two people who are in love, they're the most attractive people in the world. That doesn't mean that. Now, Diana, I was trying to present someone who was an academic who was also conventionally attractive, because we don't always see that. But for Brent, I find as a romance writer, if you just base a connection on physical attraction, then you limit the potential of emotional connection. It's okay, then you have to work twice as hard to make sure that these people are kindred spirits and to develop that relationship. I personally, as a reader, find it my least favorite, but I also remember that Brent and Diana to each other are the best looking people in the world because they're in love. And when we fall in love with people, we have those visors on that allow us to see that. Mimi Matthews, who's a favorite author of mine, she often talks about this, the fact that her heroes and heroines are attracted to each other, but if we met them on the street, they'd just be normal people. So I like to focus on things about people, because we're never just attracted to the whole thing. Like some people really like someone's eyes or their smile or their hands, or with Diana and Brent, she likes his speaking voice. That gives some nuance to the attraction and hopefully then establishes a deeper connection between the two of them.
Yeah. And Beth in the comments says she loves it when the couple connects on deeper levels and for reasons other than looks. So yeah, I think that that's a very important thing. And then it also helps us to put ourselves in that story a little bit, because, you know, not all of us can, you know, claim to have Hollywood type, you know, looks, and so it's nice to be able to find this relatable, like, oh, this could be my story. And so I love when that comes across in a book. One of the other things that I really liked was the scene, and again I won't give it away, but in the Whispering Gallery. Am I getting it right?
Yes. Yeah, in St. Paul's. Yeah.
They have a very sweet moment in the Whispering Gallery. And one of the things that I want to, if you haven't had a chance to read this book, Rachel's descriptions, you feel like you're there. And I'm not particularly good at envisioning things that I haven't actually seen.
Well, your books prove otherwise.
But I've actually been there. So I've been to Montana. So I can, you know, this is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like. But you were able to paint a picture in my mind. And then it was so funny because as I was preparing for this interview, I went to the website for St. Paul's Basilica or St. Paul's Cathedral. And they said the Whispering Gallery is closed until early 2021.
Yeah.
And I was like disappointed. Like, wait a second. I was going to go have a moment there. I don't know if it would be with my husband, or I don't know if I'd be traveling by myself, but I was going to have a moment in the Whispering Gallery just because of how beautiful that scene was in your book.
Well, when I was there, I've been a few times, but when I was there specifically for London restoration research, it was a week when there was no photography allowed. So you go in as a writer and you're like, okay, I can't take photos even though I'm writing about this. So my notebook became my camera. And what I'll do is I'll go to a city and I will stop and I will write down descriptions on site. And I do a lot of that. So Brent and Diana actually meet for the first time in a churchyard at St. Bartholomew the Great. I wrote that entire scene, even though it was out of chronological order, in a notebook sitting on a park bench. So when I can on research trips, it's a little different during COVID, I write as much as I can in descriptions in my notebook and tie them in later. And so that was huge with St. Paul's because there was no photography. It was like, okay, I can get pictures from the internet, but I also want to go around and write descriptions as I see them. So hopefully that comes through in the book. But I found that you know, for Diana and for Brent, that was a huge part of their love story, only because they both love churches so much and because Christopher Wren is such a huge part of Diana's life. So I really enjoyed writing those sequences a lot. So yay, Whispering Gallery.
And one of the things we haven't even spoken about yet is there is a completely other level to this book, and it deals with espionage and the intelligence agencies and this new life that Diana has gained during the war, and it follows her after the war. And again, like those are not my favorite types of books, but it upped the stakes for the romance, because for me it's all about the location and the romance.
I know, that's me too.
Yeah,
I want characters and romance and location.
Yeah, I don't care what the plot is. I just want a good location and a great romance. And so for me, I typically don't read a lot of thrillers that deal with those kind of things. But you took that plot thread and you made it up the stakes for their relationship. And also for the city's restoration as well, because you introduced this new threat that a lot of people at the time probably weren't thinking of, and that was with, you know, communism, and they were having to think about the Cold War, which they didn't even know was they knew was coming, but not many people knew about it. And so that added a whole new element too, and another level of research for you to do.
Yeah. And I should tell you, Janine, just straight up, you know, this as an author, you are always, I had finished a duology of historical mysteries. I wanted to move to historical romance, which I've always wanted to write. It's just taken a very roundabout way to get here. I wanted my publisher to buy this series. And so I was looking at what is going to make this very saleable. And of course, as Rachel, I just want characters and romance and location and no plot. I just want to write the wonderful romantic scenes. I knew that wouldn't pass. So I thought, how can I make this hook more attractive to a broad readership and my publisher so that they can't say no when I pitch this to my editor? So that's where the espionage came in. I thought if I add Bletchley Park, if I add espionage and coat breaking, that gives it another level. So it was very intentional in order to sell this next book. And, you know, I have a companion book coming out called The Mozart Code, which features two of the characters that were in London Restoration. And so it was very well planned.
Oh, that's great. I was going to ask you, because it did certainly feel like you were leading us into not necessarily a sequel, but another book coming.
Yeah.
And so when will we be able to get our hands on that?
So the Mozart Code comes out next summer. It says May on Amazon, but that's a lie. And it features a marriage of convenience between two people who you meet in London Restoration, but you don't really get to know. Okay. I set them up so that their characters are just like, really? What is up with those two? So you meet Sophie Villiers and Simon Barr, whose name is actually Simon Barrington. He's just changed it in MI6, and he's Diana's handler, and you get their story. And I pitched it as Downton Abbey meets the Alice Network. So there's a whole history of lords and ladies, and that comes out next summer. You don't have to have read London Restoration, but you do get to meet the characters there, and it's set in Cold War Vienna and Prague. So very gorgeous kind of Cold War city.
Yes. Well, that's fantastic. Now, could you tell us a little bit about, you have it, and I have the book sitting right here. Tell us a little bit about your new release. It's just come out. And I would love to have you just do a quick promo for what people can find in this book.
So basically, everybody, I've been talking about churches and historical fiction, but I am a massive made-for-TV Christmas movie buff. I love them. Every year they come on, I just love them to death because I'm a romance fanatic. So I noticed that no one had ever written a book that featured made-for-TV Christmas movies a la Hallmark and Lifetime and Up Network. So I pitched a book that was all about how to incorporate these movies into your Christmas traditions. So it's got recipes and a choose your own made for TV Christmas movie adventure. It also has lists of some of my favorite made for TV Christmas movies. It's all, every chapter is a theme. You've got the book lovers Christmas, the fairy tale Christmas, the classic Christmas. It is the book for anyone on your list who loves Countdown to Christmas on Hallmark and watches all of them. And there's at least one person in most families. It's illustrated, it's a gift book, and it kind of was a very nice mental break after spending so much time in post-World War II Britain to write this. So it's basically my love of made-for-TV Christmas movies, which are already on because they started early this year, which is great.
Yes.
And Janine, your books need to be TV movies, not Christmas movies necessarily, but Netflix, get on that.
Oh.
The next Virgin River.
Oh, wouldn't that be great? Yeah, I heard they're about to release their second season.
Yes.
But,
looking forward to that.
When I watched that, the whole time I'm like, this is like my story.
I know.
It's like the same setting, although mine's in Montana and that's in California. It really is. And now there's a new show
California
called,
by way of like British Columbia. There is
exactly.
It is so Canada. But
Yeah.
no, your books would translate really well to screen. So
Oh, thank you.
hopefully
Thank
someday.
You. Well, and so would the London Restoration. And you know what? I could get my husband to go with me because he loves like the Bourne movies and the anything, the Kinsman movies.
Yes.
Anything dealing with espionage, like he's all about. And so this would be the perfect movie for us to go see together. So I will say a prayer that someone in Hollywood is listening to this podcast, which you know they are. I mean, why wouldn't
Of course they are. This is their Monday night. They've like cleared their schedule for this. Exactly. They're waiting for us.
So, I'll ask this question before we go. Yeah. Rachel wants to know which movie on Hallmark or any of those networks are you looking forward to this season?
There is actually, guys, I just can't believe I wasn't consulted. Last year I was in Vienna, which is my favorite city in the world. I was there for a research trip for Mozart Code while they were filming Christmas in Vienna. And Christmas in Vienna on Hallmark actually, like it was a Hallmark movie was filming while I was in Vienna. So that one airs later in November, and that's the one I'm most looking forward to. I believe Sarah Drew is the main actress. Because I write little contemporary romances, the 3/4 Time series in Vienna, I've kind of been like, hey, Hallmark, why not just like get me to work with you? I love you so much. That didn't happen. But that's the one I'm most looking forward to, but I will watch them all.
Mm-hmm. Like and the one I'm looking forward to most, I think it's called Holly and Ivy, and it stars Jeremy Jordan, who was Jack Kelly in Newsies for 5 years.
Absolutely.
And he's fantastic. And, you know, when you were talking about maybe one day looking at the golden age of Broadway in New York and writing it into a book, I thought, well, he better look like Jeremy Jordan because
he is wonderfully talented and very smart. And
so I'm excited to see that one.
Anytime they get Broadway people to do Hallmark, I'm big into that as well.
Yes. So obviously, I think everybody who's been watching has been able to see just how completely dynamic you are and how many different genres you're able to write about and talk about. And on social media, we get to see all those different facets of you.
I'm crazy on social media. Sorry, everybody.
So I would love for you to tell the people who are watching and the people in the book club where they could connect with you after this.
So basically, my handle is RachKMC, RachKMC, across social media. So Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, my author page. I would say that Instagram and Twitter are my two favorites because that's where I talk about all the books I'm reading, and I'm always reading like 7 books at once. But also find me on Goodreads because I do update my Goodreads a lot, and I am a voracious reader in multiple genres. So that's where I love to connect people over books that they're reading and loving.
Yeah. And you were the one that told me about Mimi Matthews. Which,
I love her. She's become a very close friend. She is. And she actually just signed a massive deal with Berkeley, which is just amazing. For an indie, she's been an indie author. She's been, publishing her own books. And it's going to be fantastic. But I actually met her because I wrote a Goodreads review of one of her books, and she sought me out, and now we talk every day. We text every day. So that's been really awesome. Yeah.
That's great. Well, tell her I said hi. I'm her new biggest stalking fan. She probably has already started recognizing me because anytime somebody mentions her, I
but what author doesn't want to hear that about themselves, right?
Yeah, she's fantastic. And if Berkeley ever has another author event, once all this is said and done, and she's there, I'm going to be the person like scooching my chair towards her.
Me too.
Yes.
No, Janine, you're a pioneer. I mean, I tell a lot of, so everybody, this has become the Rachel show, I'm sorry. But I also work as a literary agent, and I tell a lot of my clients who are wanting to branch beyond, to write clean, wholesome, inspirational fiction beyond like Christian fiction, that you are with Berkeley, and that is a place where Christian authors can go. And I find that you're a pioneer there, because you went there and you were able to write inspirational romance that will appeal to a wide readership. And I think it's kind of cool. So
Aw,
yay
thank
for
you so much.
I use you as a comp title a lot for people.
Oh,
A comparative
great.
title. Like, this has worked.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for everybody at home who has tuned into this and will tune into it over the next few hours. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Rachel, for talking with us about the London Restoration. One of my favorite tropes, you know, you said earlier that you often see people come back together after a war, and that's my favorite trope. But in all of my favorite movies, one of them dies as soon as they get back together after the war.
Terrible.
So it was such a relief. Like, oh, they do get their happily ever after. They get their hopeful ending.
Yeah.
So thank you for redeeming my favorite trope and letting me know that there is hope out there. And it was wonderful to talk with you. And I'm looking forward to reading your next book that comes out, and your Hallmark movie guide, which I will be using for the Jeremy Jordan movie. So I will be having a Broadway themed Hallmark party for that one. So. Well,
thanks, Janine, and thanks everybody for watching.